the Canon RF100-500 f4.5-7.1. This is a lens to rule them all if you have enough light. It's a lens I like to travel with as it's fairly compact, extremely versatile, and it's great for wildlife photography as well as landscapes and other general photography. It's also great for video because of the optical stabilisation system. And generally when I'm travelling, low light situations aren't that much of an issue as I don't always have to use extreme shutter speeds for every subject. Now I've been serious about using this lens for professional sports for quite a while, but I've had to wait patiently for the right moment to use this instead of my usual setup, which is the Canon 400mm f2.8 along with the RF 70-200 on a second camera. I generally switch between two cameras during play, but the convenience of having one lens that can go from 100mm to 500mm focal length is a bit of a luxury, as well as a 1.6x crop mode on the R5 that produces a huge 800mm focal distance, and I'm still getting 17 megapixel images. The lens has optical stabilisation as well as in-body stabilisation on the new R series cameras. That allows for steady and sharp handheld shooting. But of course, there are some fairly major drawbacks and caveats, one being the f7.1 aperture when zoomed out. That is a major handicap when working in low light situations, and it's why I generally use the much bigger and heavier 400mm f2.8 lens along with the 70-200 f2.8. That combination never seems to fail. However, it can be a lot of extra work carrying that gear around. So when I had the chance to use the 100-500 in a real world professional sports environment, I was really keen to test the 100-500 lens out again to see what it can do and also compare it against my usual setup. Let's see how it performed. So first of all, light is very important for sports photography as you'll need to compensate for extremely fast shutter speeds. To do that, you'll need either a lot of natural light, a wide aperture, or very high ISO. For the 100-500mm lens, the best option is to use it when there is plenty of bright natural light available. If you try and use it in extreme conditions such as under floodlights, it will struggle, especially at the longer end with the f7.1 aperture. So I had the opportunity to use this lens for several 3 p.m. kickoffs, one for a rugby championship match between Australia and South Africa, and also for an A-League match, both held at the Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane. The 3 p.m. kickoff allowed for plenty of bright natural light for the first half at least, then I could change back to my usual setup and then compare the results. So now let's get into Lightroom and analyze the results. So basically, in order to compare the results between the 400 and the 100-500, I had the 400mm on the R3 and I had the 100-500 fitted to the R5. I thought that would be the fairest way of doing things. So these are the shots with the R3 with the 400mm lens. As you can see, the background blur is absolutely fantastic. So these images are actually shot at f4 and you can see that I'm at ISO 1000 already, and this is like a 3 p.m. kickoff, so this is like sort of bright daylight. You know, it's already pretty high. So let's take a look at the R5. So this is the 100-500. So we're shooting at 100mm, I'm at f4.5, I'm at ISO 800. So it's not bad, but once you zoom in, you're kind of looking at the overall quality and you're not really going to outperform a 400mm f2.8 lens. But when zoomed out, you know, it seems okay. I just need to do a small little crop. So obviously bear in mind that these images are straight out of camera. What I really love about the 100-500 is the ability to zoom in and out. It's just such a luxury to have in sports photography, especially when you're used to having fixed lenses. The 400mm, it's great because it's simple, it's kind of point and shoot, but you are relying on having to crop in order to zoom in on your subject. Having the 100-500 means that you can zoom in and out. So this shot was taken at 500mm, so I'm at f7.1, I'm at ISO 2000. That is perfectly acceptable. You look at the overall quality and it seems perfectly fine to me. The background blur it's nice. It's nowhere near as good as what you're going to get with the R3 and the 400mm. So this is what you get with a 400mm. Even now, I'm still at f4. I'm not even at f2.8 for this one. I'm at f4 and I'm at ISO 1600. That's 1/2000th of a second. So look at the difference between the 400mm and the 100-500. It's not really going to matter that much from an editorial point of view, but the subject separation is so much better using the 400mm. It is a fixed lens, which means that you just can't really zoom in and out. The only way you can zoom in is by cropping in, and it means losing pixels, but generally with modern cameras, it's not really an issue, and it, got to be honest, hasn't really been an issue with older cameras either, so it really doesn't matter. The great thing about the 100-500 was the crowd shots, but this is taken with a 400mm. So I'm still at f4, I'm at ISO 1250, getting some really nice shots of the crowd. This is with the 100-500. So this is shot at 100mm f4.5 on ISO 800. Really isn't much of a difference in terms of quality when you're doing crowd shots with the 100-500. Great thing about it is the ability to zoom in. So I'm now at 300mm. This is at f5.6 to give me just a little bit more depth of field. Just going to get a little bit more of the crowd in focus. Loving the crowd shots. I can literally scan around the crowd, pick out people. I'm able to zoom in and out. This is at 300mm again, f5.6. So now I've zoomed still at 300 here, and now I've zoomed out to 100mm f4.5, and then zooming back in again at 500mm f7.1, ISO 2500. So you can see that the ISO really is beginning to creep up, but not that much of an issue really. More crowd shots here, zooming back out 100mm. The versatility of having this focal range is really fantastic when you're kind of working in a stadium and you're trying to get as much footage as you can before kickoff. Really, it's just a fantastic luxury to have. So zooming back in at 500mm f7.1 and out a little bit at 400mm 6.3. You can see the depth of field is not bad. You know, you probably want a bit more subject separation, and that's what you get with the 400mm. But to be honest, from an editorial point of view, these look perfectly fine to me. So this is the CR3. So this is the R3 with the 400mm. I'm at 5.6 there to get a little bit more depth of field. Now we're beginning to creep into the beginning of the game, and this is an interesting shot. These are the mascots that have come out. So for this, I'm at f4. This is the 400mm 1600 ISO, and with the 100-500, because of the versatility of the zoom and the zoom range, I'm able to get the players kind of running out into the field. And got some nice shots there, and I'm kind of zooming in and out at various different focal lengths here. I was kind of standing at the side. I didn't want to stray too far away from my gear because I'm trying to do this sort of comparison. And we already had people covering the lineups and you know, the sort of the pre-match show and everything like that. So I was happy to sort of hang by the wings. I was using 100-500 here, and again, the versatility of that zoom range is just really great. Being able to go from 145mm f4.5 and zoom straight in 324 f5.6. Really fantastic. You know, being able to do that with one lens is really great. This is when they start doing the national anthem, so a really great opportunity to get loads and loads of crowd shots. So this is where the 100-500 really came into its element, being able to scan around the stadium and get really far away shots like this one, for example. This is shot at 223mm f5, ISO 1000. And then to zoom straight into some of the fans that are literally standing a few meters away from me. So this is shot at 186mm at f5. Zooming back in again at 238. I'm really pleased with these crowd shots, and the 100-500 lens was actually the perfect lens for this. And like I said previously, not too bothered about like this background blur and the depth of field. Obviously it's nice to have that separation, but it's nice to have that versatility of being able to zoom in and out. And for these shots, I think it was actually the ideal lens to use. But of course, I've got the light to be able to do it. But I'm not always at 500mm 7.1. These are shot at 100mm f4.5, zoomed in slightly 135. So you're not always shooting at 500mm. You don't always have to shoot at 7.1. So here's an example of some of the in-game action. So this was shot at 500mm f7.1, and I'm already at ISO 2000. So it's already pretty high, especially for a 3 p.m. kickoff. We're getting lots of light coming into the stadium, and you're already at ISO 2000. So it's obviously worth noting that I'm shooting at 1/1250th of a second. That's kind of important. So for sports, your shutter speed generally has to be pretty high, and of course you need to compensate for that. The only way you're going to compensate is to have good natural light and very high ISO. Just going to do a quick crop here. So all these images are straight out of camera. I haven't done any editing at all. That's worth noting that. So just going to straighten that up a little bit. It's probably a little bit better to look at now. This is 400mm f6.3, and you can see that the subject separation is not the greatest, and that's obviously the aperture 7.1. That's kind of like one of the other drawbacks of using this lens, is that you're not getting that kind of immersive feeling of the images. Like when you're using a 400mm lens, And let's try and find one here. When you're using a 400mm lens, you really feel like you're part of the action. So this is not a bad comparison here. You've got that extra subject separation. So I'm still at f4 actually on here. I'm not even at f2.8. So when I compare something like this with the subject separation on the 100-500 lens, I mean, for here I'm shooting at 363 at f5.6. Not a huge difference, but something about the 400mm lens really allows for much greater subject separation. And I think that's generally the reason why I prefer to use it. The 100-500's done a pretty good job. So this one's shot at 500-7.1. Not bad. I mean, it's quite a nice fall off. You can see pretty good separation between the subjects and the background. Again here, nice subject separation, nice and sharp, nicely in focus. But here, f4, 400mm. It's going to crop in so we can see the action a bit better. So this is the 400mm. I'm at ISO 1250th. I'm at 1/2000th of a second. So this is 500mm at f7.1 ISO 2000. That's the 400mm f4 at 1200th of a second. Not a massive difference really. So if you do have enough light coming in and you're able to compensate for the fast shutter speed, you can actually get pretty good results with the 100-500 lens, even at f7.1. So no reason not to use it. But like I said, very, very difficult lens to use when it comes to low light situations. So you've obviously got to bear that in mind. It's really important to use it in the right way, in the right environment. So I'm just going to scroll through some of these other images, kind of miss focus on a few of them here. Nothing really that spectacular here, unfortunately. So this is an interesting shot. It gives you an idea. Let's just zoom in here. So we've got a little bit closer to the action. This gives you an idea of the limitations really. So 135mm f4.5 ISO 1000. Nothing spectacular about this image at all. There's not enough subject separation for me. I mean, in fact, that so much of the background is kind of visible. Nothing's really amazing happening with these images, unfortunately. I mean, it's generally a decent batch of photos, but nothing spectacular from the 100-500. So there, for example, difficult to see what's going on because of the fact that so much of the background is in focus still. So it's a lens that is versatile, it's light, it's compact, you can handhold it pretty much all day when I'm able to use this lens handheld. But when it really comes down to like really impressive looking images, don't think it can really compete with the 400 f2.8. So these are some of the shots taken of the crowd with the 400mm. So these were shot at f4. I'm at ISO 2000. So I still haven't gone down to 2.8 on this lens yet. Some of these action shots with the 400mm, they just look so much sharper. Background blur, the bokeh is just so much softer as well. So we got to the second half and I switched the 100-500 with the 70-200 f2.8. So I'm now with my usual setup, which is the R3 with the 400mm and the R5 with the 70-200, both f2.8 lenses. So I'm now shooting f2.8 on the 70-200 and I'm gradually moving down to 2.8 on the 400mm. So I'm at 3.2 right now for some reason. Now, this for me is the winning formula. I don't mind having to swap cameras over. So I'm shooting at 400mm for most of the game, and then as soon as the action starts coming closer, I generally switch over to 70-200, and it's such a winning combination, it really is. So 3.2 at the 400mm. Did I ever make it down to f2.8? I think it's because we had so much light coming in the stadium that it wasn't necessary to shoot f2.8. And also the fact that rugby is quite a tricky game to photograph because there's just so many bodies sort of in the way and piling up. So by using f4, I'm just getting that slightly deeper depth of field. So if I do miss focus slightly on someone's face, likelihood is that I might just get a little bit more in focus of the subject. Not too bothered about the background. It's more a case of getting everything in focus. So this was shot on the 70-200, 2.8. So I'm actually at f4 with the 70-200 as well. Again, for the same reason that because there's so many bodies and I just don't want to miss focus too much. Even though the eye tracking autofocus is so good on the Canon cameras, there are still those occasions where you might just sort of miss focus slightly. So it's a really nice sequence of photographs of the two Australian players kind of getting each other's way. I think as the day went on, I gradually moving down to f2.8. So this is the 400mm f2.8. So the advantage now is that I'm dropping the shutter speed down slightly and it's also moving the ISO down. So my ISO 1600. So as the day progresses, the light is going to start to dim slightly. So that's when you need to start adjusting your settings. So I'm now moving down to f2.8. I'm bringing the shutter speed down slightly. It's still pretty fast at 1/600th of a second and ISO 1600. So now in-game action, I'm shooting at f2.8, and look at that subject separation. Look at that background blur. Let's just crop in so that we're just a little bit closer to the action here. There we go. That's what f2.8 does. That's that subject separation that the 400mm f2.8 lens can achieve. And again, let's just crop in so that we can have a better look at what's going on. Again, really nice background blur, subject separation. So it took me quite a long time into the game to finally make it down to f2.8. Sometimes you just don't really need to use it. Like I said, it's better to have more of your subjects in focus than to use a 2.8. So as the action's coming closer towards me, I'm switching to the 70-200. This is shot at 135mm at f2.8, and I'm using pretty much the same shutter speed now. So that's kind of the advantage of using two f2.8 lenses, that you can basically lock down the same settings. So you're shooting at the same shutter speed, you're pretty much getting the same ISO, and you're working at the same aperture values. Instead of working with 100-500 where you're going to be working at different apertures, you're going to have to alter the shutter speed, and you're going to get very different sort of levels of ISO. So it's great to have that consistency of having two f2.8 lenses working together. Bit of a luxury, I know, but that's the nature of sports photography. So 70-200, action's coming towards me, it's getting much closer, and that's a nice image there of one of the players kind of trying to break through to the line. And that shot at 111mm f2.8, 1/1600th of a second. And another nice shot of the player scoring a try right in the corner. Obviously, one of the drawbacks of using 70-200 is the fact that you're a little bit further away. That shot at 111mm probably could have got a bit closer to the action, but even at f2.8, with the 70-200 lens, you're still getting quite a lot of the background in focus. It's the dynamics between focal distance, focal range, and aperture. Because I'm much further away, the picture was taken, even though it was shot at 2.8, you're not going to get a lot of subject separation. So it's worth bearing in mind that just because you're shooting f2.8 doesn't mean you're always going to get really, really blurred out background. But nice thing about 70-200 is that I can move very, very quickly with it, and I can turn around and get nice shots of the crowd like I did with 100-500. These are being shot at f2.8. If I miss focus, then the image could be pretty unusable. So you really have to be careful on what you're focusing on. So another good example here, because I'm so much closer to my subject, and also there's a greater distance between the subject and the background, and that means that I am getting a really, really nice fall off here in background blur, even at f2.8. So looking at your background is really important, and judging the focal distance and the focal range is really important. That's if you want to achieve really, really shallow depth of field. And really nice in-game action here. Let's just do a little crop again. Let's just crop into this player here as he's making a run for the line. So again, really nice subject separation, because our subject is so much further away from the background. We're getting a really nice fall off here, and these are shot at f2.8. Don't think I did a lot of work with the 400mm in the second half, purely because most of the action was coming towards me. So switching to the 70-200 for the second half was actually the right choice, because most of the action was coming towards me. And another really nice shot here of the player getting past the line. Let's do a little crop in so we can just see more of what's going on. And yeah, I really like that shot because the player's nicely in focus. We can see the ball hitting the ground, even though he's kind of slightly behind the goalpost here. And they like to have these pads around the goalpost so the players don't injure themselves. Okay, so we've got the 400mm back here. This is shot at f2.8, 1/1600th of a second, ISO 1600. Let's do a little crop again so we can see what's going on. And yeah, I really like that image. It's reasonably sharp in focus, but you can see here these players are in focus, and already at 2.8, player who's just behind them kind of lose focus a little bit. That's the depth of field. That's what f2.8 is giving you. So that's why you need to be so precise with your focusing. If you don't hit focus properly, then the image could end up just being unusable, unfortunately. So that was like the benefit before shooting at f4 or sometimes even f5.6 for rugbies, because you're more likely to avoid missing focus shooting at f4 or f5.6. But now I'm shooting at f2.8 because the light is dropping quite quickly. That's the benefit of being able to have f2.8, is that you can just drop it down and get that extra light. But shooting at f4 or f5.6 on the 400mm, that doesn't really bother me that much. More of the game now is further into the field, so I'm using the 400mm more. Again, nice shot, lots of bodies piling in, and that's the difficulty with rugby, shooting rugby, is that you do tend to have a lot of people in the shot all the time. Like, for example, when you're shooting football or soccer, you can get players who are like isolated more often. With rugby, it's difficult to get players that are isolated, so you really do have to check on that focusing. Let's crop in again here, get a really nice kind of tight crop. Cropping in doesn't really bother me too much. You really want to concentrate on getting the focus right and your composition more than worrying about pixels and resolutions. It's a nice shot, but I love the background blur, the fall off, the image separation or the subject separation is really good there. And that's what you expect with a 2.8 lens. So again, the dynamics between focal range, focal length and aperture really coming into play here. Even though it's f2.8, you're not getting a really amazing fall off depth of field because players are so much closer to the background. So you need to understand the dynamics between like focal distance, focal range and aperture. If your subject is closer to the background won't be blurred out as much. Really nice shot of the crowd. That shot at f2.8. Again, plane of focus, it doesn't really matter. Most of the people are pretty much sitting at the same plane of focus, so most of that scene is going to be in focus, so it doesn't really matter what aperture you're using. You're not going to get any depth of field. So here, deliberately managed to get the crowd with the players blurred out in the background. Again, it's just shooting f2.8, and that's just depth of field effect. So the background is in focus, the players are out of focus. And I thought that was kind of interesting with the flames, the pyrotechnics going off. And so you can see the difference now. So the crowd in the background are in focus, and then the next shot I focused on the players running towards us. I thought that was quite interesting to get that shot. Coming towards the end of the game, Australia have been beaten pretty badly, I think, by South Africa. So I'm just kind of scanning around and getting shots of the crowd, and some interesting ones going on here. Difficult with the 400mm to get close-up shots of the crowd because you've got such a shallow depth of field with that 400mm 2.8 combination. You can see here, just moving the lens over a little bit and just getting the crowd that are just slightly further away, you're actually getting a really nice photo because that foreground is nicely blurred out, and you can see the rest of the crowd beginning to blur out, and you've got that nice kind of little strip in the middle that's in focus. Nice shot of the kids here waiting for autographs. This kind of inflatable kangaroo was being thrown around quite a lot. Made for quite a good image, especially at f2.8. A little bit more in-game action. Yeah, I like this image actually. I'm going to crop in so we can see more of what's going on. Nice background blur. Quite pleased with that one. And some nice crowd shots. Yeah, nice shot here of one of the players tackling the Australian player. Really nice fall off there, background blur. Subject nicely in focus. Pleased with that one, f2.8. Scrolling through, nothing really to shout about here too much. I think this is the final kick of the game. So, final whistle, switch to the 70-200. Nice subject background and separation here. Going to zoom in slightly. That's with the 70-200 lens, and that's f2.8. And quite pleased with that one. Really nice separation. Let's just quickly compare that to one taken on the 100-500. And you kind of see that 7.1, and let's compare that again with the one taken here. Yeah, I mean, 2.8 really is giving you that much better depth of field. Nice crowd shots here, 70-200. So that shot at 108mm f2.8. Again, you've got to be really careful with your focusing because a lot of your image is going to be out of focus now. So you can see what's happening here, plane of focus. This person's in focus. This inflatable kangaroo's in focus, and this guy here is in focus. That's plane of focus. That's why you have to be really careful using f2.8. Sort of handshakes, celebrations, 400mm. So I'm going from 70-200 to the 400mm lens. Again, 400, 400, and that's the 70-200. So because the subject is so much closer to me, and the background's so much further away, you're getting that really nice background blur and depth of field. So I think that pretty much wraps it up. So all in all, what do we make of the 100-500 lens? Well, basically 100-500, versatile, it's lightweight, you've got the optical stabilisation system, 4.5 to 7.1, not that much of an issue, I've got to be honest. For most of the game I was shooting at f4 on the 400mm lens. I mean, it's a totally different dynamics because it's 400mm and it's fixed, and I'm using it in a different way. I'm using it on a monopod, where I'm using the 100-500 handheld. So there's a whole totally different dynamics. But being able to have the option of moving down to 2.8 as the light starts to drop, that's really giving me a huge advantage. The 100-500 would really struggle with the lower light conditions, so more of the action was coming towards me in the second half, so switch to the 70-200 was the right choice to make. As the light starts to drop, having that f2.8 aperture is obviously a huge advantage. Was the quality of my images better or worse with the 100-500? Well, quality of the imagery I don't think is in question, really. I mean, you're getting really good quality images, you're not getting the same depth of field as you're zooming in because of the aperture. If you use the lens in the right way, you can actually achieve some really great results. And if I have more kind of early kickoffs where I've got good light, then I have to be honest, it's a lens I'll probably start taking with me more often, purely because of the versatility of the fact that I can walk around the stadium with one lens and I can get shots of the players warming up. I can also get shots of the crowd. I can get shots of people like the other end of the stadium. I can get shots of people who are like sitting right behind me. That's the sort of versatility that I find a huge advantage. Not having to have like so many cameras and lenses with you, because you don't really have time to switch. You don't really have time to change lenses either. It's just that having that simplicity of having one lens. So all in all, in a nutshell, 100-500 lens, fantastic. Does have limitations, does have serious drawbacks and caveats. You're still going to get really amazing images. Just be prepared for extremely high ISO values if you're shooting at 500mm 7.1 and your light starts to drop, or you had very low light to begin with. You're going to be shooting at absolutely crazy high ISO values. Having f2.8 all the way, massive advantage. The images are going to pop. You're going to get amazing background blur and fall off and image and subject separation. You just got to be careful with your focusing shooting at f2.8, especially when plane of focus is an obvious issue. But all in all, it was a great experiment. 100-500, a lens that maybe I would consider using more often for sports. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope this video has been of some benefit and some help in some way. Please give it a like, give it a share, and subscribe for more videos. Thank you.